Hey everyone, welcome to the That's Allowed podcast. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Audrey McKeon. And today we're here with Richard Midson. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be on your show. I love your show because of the kind of questions that you ask.
Thank
I've
you.
listened to quite a few of your episodes and I love this, but having been someone that used to ask questions, because I used to work in radio news, this is going to be really quite a different experience for me with you asking me questions. So you're probably going to have to shut me up so that I answer the questions that you want. But it's going to be really interesting. But basically, I used to be in radio news. I used to be a broadcaster. I spent 10 years as a reporter, news editor, and I used to present a rolling news. So it's like sort of CNN or what do you call it? I can't remember the other news channels in America.
It's all right.
But I used to do this on the radio. So I used to present 5 days a week and I used to present rolling news. But the thing I'm used to doing is asking other people questions. I'm not used to telling my story. And this is why I was fascinated by your show and the way that you draw stories out of people. And I thought, right, I'm going to have to submit to Adrienne here and see what she can get out of me. So I'm a bit nervous, I got to admit.
Yes, you must bow to the process. No, I think it's actually, what I like about this process is it's a very collaborative process. And so what I try to do, I ask my questions, but I also just sort of let people take it in whatever direction it naturally kind of flows. So we'll just see what happens. Richard. But welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. I've never had someone who was a professional journalist on before, so this is very exciting for me. So let's just jump right in with the first question, which is, what story are you not telling?
When I saw that you asked this to other people, and I thought, what is that story? And it's actually the fact that I haven't really, apart from friends, ever explained my story as to what happened to me. Because, I've never appeared, as I say, I've never been a guest on a show to talk about me. I always ask the questions.
Right.
And I've kind of been thinking about it. And over my life, I realized that there's been a lot of moments in my life where, because I just sort of said, to hell with this, I achieve things. And there's a lot of examples. So you're going to have to cut me off if I start to rabbit on, or if you think people are going to start getting bored by this. But to give you sort of a little bit of a concept of that, is that I remember in my early 20s, I was working for a travel firm. And I used to put a headset on every day. You turn up in the morning, you put this headset on, put the microphone on, and you switched on your phone and you weren't allowed to turn it off. And after each person came through, you just got another one delivered. And there was one day where I had just absolutely had enough. And I think we've all been through these moments, right? Where even though it's not logical to do this, you do it. And I just cut 10 people off. I just cut them off. I couldn't stand it. I'd absolutely lost it. I hated this job. And after lunch, I ended up in the boardroom with the manager, strangely enough. And we discussed sales targets, which I at the time said that I wasn't particularly interested in or cared about, which didn't go down very well. And it was made fairly clear to me that perhaps I should find another job. And the thing was, though, that during my lunch breaks, I used to dash out of the office and I would go to a local radio station because I got to know some of the people that worked at this local radio station. So purely for a hobby, for a bit of fun, as a distraction from this job, I used to go to the radio station and I used to help out in any way I could, just as a kind of hobby thing. Because I never thought you could actually do this. Radio was something that other people did. But because I knew a few people and they said, oh, come in, help out. It's like, I did. So I used to dash off there and come back after my lunch break rather than just sitting in the canteen and doing nothing. And so there I was needing to get another job. So I applied for another job. And every one of us has had very different backgrounds. But for me, I was brought up in a very stable, very loving family. And that stability partly came from having, my dad had a proper job in an office that he had been at all his life. And that was what gave us stability. And so naturally, I kind of assumed you had to have a proper job. And that meant working in an office, pushing paper around. Mm-hmm. So I simply didn't believe that you could ever get into journalism or you could be in radio. So there I was, I applied for a proper job. I got a job with a firm that sold bricks, which was as interesting as it sounds. It was 2 weeks after, 2 weeks after I started, I hated them, they hated me, and we parted ways. So again, I was out there. So something was kind of going, this is all going wrong, Rick. You've got to start listening to yourself a bit more.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine from this radio station was the editor of a local newspaper. And I said to him, can I come into your office and use your office to keep warm while I apply for a proper job? But of course, the moment I got in there, I couldn't help myself.
Of
So I
course not.
started, I mean, it's just impossible. You've got all these people, all this energy, all this
Yeah.
excitement about, what stories can we find? What can we put out today? Who interesting people can we go and meet? And the second week I was there, I wrote the front page lead story exclusive for the paper. I was like, okay, something is happening here. I
Yeah.
have got to start listening to myself, because it wasn't even planned. It was just happening without me trying.
Mm-hmm.
And this I think is a big theme of my life, is you've got to try as hard as you fight yourself to
Mm-hmm.
listen to this call. So I started doing that, and I started going into the radio station more because I had time, and realized how much I was loving it. And I started applying for regular jobs. And then I decided to apply for a journalism course. Now, I didn't think I was going to get on this. And it was at that time that someone very close to me said, I've got to be honest with you, you don't have what it takes to be a journalist. But I applied, and I thought, well, what harm is it? It's
Right.
like applying for any job. You apply for 10 jobs, you might get one interview. Well, whatever, let's just apply. And I went on this selection day for this thing, and it was a knockout day. So if you are there at the end of the day, you have a place on the course. At each stage of the day, so several times during the day, they just cut people from it, and they just sort of say, go home. And at the end of the day, I was still there. And at the time, this was the top course for journalism in the country. And there I was with a place being offered on this course. So it's like, what's happening here? How is this happening?
The
I
universe
can't do
listens.
journalism. I don't have what it takes to be a journalist. So I went to the radio station next day, and they said, look, if you drop the course, we will employ you and train you to be a journalist here at the radio station. So I'm like, okay. So suddenly I've got an offer for the top course in the country, and I've got an offer for a job, even though I've got no skills and I don't have any ability to be a journalist. So I rang up the course and I said, what do you think I should do? And they said, take the job.
Take the job, idiot.
Get trained. So yeah, literally. I mean, you summed it up beautifully. Take the job, idiot. 2 weeks later, I was sitting there reading a 20-minute news program to thousands of people across London and the UK, and being paid for it. So, a few months before, I was screaming, pulling my hair out, trying to deal with all these annoying people, and I just couldn't stand. And when you're about to read a news bulletin, you hear a jingle. So that gives you your timing. So you hear a sort of dum dum dum, and you know that you come in at that certain point. And I used to hear this jingle, and I still remember the feeling, and I can't help but smile thinking of it. That jingle would start, and I would burst out laughing because I simply couldn't believe that someone was paying me to do something fun. I mean, they don't, do they? Surely every job has to be horrible.
Oh, God. I mean, when you feel that, it is I have never experienced anything like that high.
Oh, I bet you have. I bet you have. And we all have, but that's the thing.
Yeah.
We've all had those moments where, and I think the biggest problem is that we don't take advantage of them. And I didn't deliberately take advantage. Somehow it just sort of happened.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have. I'm sure.
No, that's what I mean. I'm just saying, like, I don't know of anything better than that feeling.
Yeah. Yes.
When you realize, wait, I'm doing what I love to do, and someone's paying me for this.
I mean, how's it possible? How is it possible?
And yet here we are.
And yet it is. And so there's you doing it. I did it too. So it just shows that anyone can ultimately do it. People used to to cut a long story short, a few years later, I was the editor at the second largest news organization, one of the duty editors in the UK behind the BBC. I was responsible for news going up to 300 local radio stations around the whole of the United Kingdom. So this was 2 years after I'd been told I didn't have what it took to be a journalist. And I was the editor in charge of journalists who had training, who had done these courses for 3 years. I had no training at all. It was all purely because I was so excited by it and so passionate about it and just enjoyed it. So it was all just spontaneous. So I just think that people have these things inside them, and I'm glad I kind of let myself go for it. And I just think we've all got to give in to ourselves sometimes.
Absolutely. You got
and
to get
go
out
with
of
it.
your own way and just start giving your gifts.
Yeah.
100%. There's story after story of famous people who were told at some point, specifically, do not do this. Like, you're no
Exactly.
good at this, right? Lucille Ball is the first one that comes to my mind. Her acting teacher told her, do anything but act. So don't listen to people. That's just their opinion, right? And it may not even be a well-informed opinion, frankly. Never disqualify yourself for what you really want to do. I've seen people do this over and over again, where they see an opportunity, but then they go, oh, I'm not qualified for that. Do you know how many people ended up in positions that they were 100% not qualified for just by having the chutzpah to try?
But it's also, I think, is that when you're a lot younger as well, you have a lot more thoughts about I can't do this, and as you start to get older, you start to get more blasé. I think, or certainly in
Yeah.
my experience, and you don't care so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to say is forget what other people say and just try it. Now, if you then hate it, then there's your answer.
Yeah.
But don't listen to what other people say. If they say this is rubbish or boring, try it anyway.
Right.
If you decide it's rubbish or boring, that's fine. But don't let anyone else decide it.
Absolutely. Got to listen
No.
to that gut. But sometimes someone can say something that kind of triggers you. Like you were saying, back at the beginning, like you started to think like, wait a second. When I was an executive assistant, I was in a review, one of those performance reviews.
Yeah.
And my boss at the time said to me, so what do you really want to do? And it was an interesting question.
Oh,
But
dangerous
right, because
question.
right there, it kind of it's a loaded question right away. Like, you clearly are not cut out for this work. So what do you really want to be doing? And so I was a little bit insulted and like taken aback. But at the same time, I was like, that's an interesting question. What do I really want to do? And so I started saying, oh, well, I guess I could do HR or I could do something else. And he was like, you strike me as a creative type.
Right.
And I had this moment where I was like, yeah, but I mean, being a creative type, like that doesn't pay. And he gave me
Yep.
this look and he's like, hold on a second. And so he goes out and he starts gathering up all these people that do creative jobs in this company and bringing them in one by one and saying, how much do you make? How much do you make? How much do you make? And then he turned to me and said, I don't ever want to hear you say again that creative types don't make money. And I was like, wow, point
It's
taken.
so fantastic when you have a mentor.
Yeah.
If you've got someone to actually show you how to do it.
Yeah. It was
I mean, I think
beautiful.
for me, I didn't so much have a mentor. I had people that allowed me to try things.
Yeah.
So it's like an example I use sometimes is that, I mean, do you remember the old mobile phones? They used to be like bricks, didn't
Oh,
they?
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, literally a brick. They were so
Yes.
heavy. And I was always into motorsport. And I like this. It's called rally driving. This is where they drive very fast cars through forest tracks, closed forest tracks. And I went to this event at Silverstone Racetrack. And I just thought, I want to do something creative. And I said to the chap in charge of sport, and this was before I was working there, I said, look, why don't I do a live interview inside a rally car? Now, this is before you had the kind of kit that you have now to do live outside broadcasts. So this was with a mobile phone built like a brick with a poor sounding microphone on it. And he was like, well, we'll just try it. And I can always cut you off if it gets too distorted. And we'll just say, oh, they're driving off into the distance or something like that. So he gave me that opportunity. So I literally started, and we were sitting in this car at one side of this car park area. And I started off and I held the phone upside down. I knew we were live. And I interviewed the driver by pointing the microphone at the bottom of the phone towards him, like you would if you imagine you're holding a microphone in your hand.
Right.
So I did a little interview like that. And I said, well, let's get going. And he floored the throttle and we blasted off. And I just carried on talking into this microphone. And I know that later on they sort of cut off after a bit. But it was the fact that they let me try this. And I got such a tremendous buzz out of it that it allowed me to then go and be more creative with other things. So a bit like you having that mentor there who was demonstrating and showing what was possible by this person saying, try it.
Yeah.
I was no longer like thinking, oh no, I shouldn't try this. It might not work. He was like, let's try it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. So it gave me the same opportunity you had with a mentor to be creative, to sort of expand what you thought was possible.
Have you had any mentors that like have really made an impact on you?
It's a really good question, that. I mean, I've had people who have given me opportunities, but I haven't had anyone that's really trained me.
Mm-hmm. Kind of taking
And
you
I,
under their wing.
yeah, and oh God, it sounds quite selfish, but I almost wish I had, because hearing your story, I'm very jealous. But
Well, and it's funny because I didn't consider him particularly a mentor. Like he was my boss and we didn't spend much time together. And that was actually the first time that he had kind of taken an interest in me and my future. And then he fired me. Uh, it was the best thing that could have
You're
happened.
kidding.
No, it was the best thing that could have happened because then I realized, like, yeah, he's right. I'm not an executive assistant. That's not really what I want to do.
Yes.
But what is it about executive assistants that resonated with me? And what part of that can I expand into what I actually want to do?
So why did you end up as an executive assistant? I've got to be careful here that I don't start trying to interview
Right?
you.
Well, so I'd gotten my PhD in drama, and I
Yes.
thought that I was going to be an academic.
Oh,
And I started
okay.
to apply for academic jobs. And I
Yeah.
went in and I, did my big song and dance presentation, and I would teach a class and I would go through this whole thing. And I kept getting the same feedback, which is she didn't seem very professional to us. She
Right.
seemed very unprofessional. And I was like, what does that mean? Someone said, well,
Exactly.
she has very unprofessional attire. And I said, well, you had me teach an African dance class? So I was wearing dance clothes. Did you expect me to wear a suit? I don't, And so I started to realize just little by little, like academia has a lot of weird rules that I don't quite understand, nor do I agree with.
Yeah.
And so I started teaching just kind of on my own here and there in different, acting schools and stuff like that. But I realized after a while that this was never really going to pay the bills in the way that I needed it to. And I had a daughter and I just really wanted her, like, like you said, to have a nice, stable home. And
Yeah.
in my mind, that was, you get a proper job, same thing. And so I thought, what can I do? I'm looking around at this area and I'm in Seattle and all the jobs are in tech. They're tech
Yeah.
companies. And there's a ton of those jobs, but like, what could I do for these tech companies? And I wasn't thinking at the time about, writing or anything like that. I was just thinking like, what could I do right now? And I figured the most entry level position that I could think of was like admin.
Yeah.
So I
Something
was aiming,
safe, stable, pushing
yes,
paper, just like I was talking about. Yeah.
exactly, aiming
Yeah.
as low as I possibly could, right? And so I
I
went
can
in,
get that.
oh yeah, I can do that. They'll give me permission to do that job. And so I started applying at different places. And the thing I got over and over again was, well, you're overqualified. You have a PhD,
Yeah.
you're overqualified. And so I kept getting rejected over and over for being overqualified. And I was like, what is this?
Where do
So
I go?
so I finally met, I through, I'll skip all that part of the story, but I got an interview at a startup. And startups are fun because there's like, again, no rules. It's like a startup. We do things the way we want to, right?
Very exciting atmosphere. Yeah.
Exactly. So I go in and I meet with this guy, and this James, he really was a mentor to me. He was absolutely wonderful to me. And I stayed with him for 4 years until the company got bought. But at the interview, we really bonded and like it was like just house on fire getting along, And he was super excited that I had a PhD. He's like, how cool is it that my assistant is more educated than I am? Like, how important am I that I have a PhD as my assistant? He just thought that was great. And what I loved about that job was learning everything about this one person, understanding what made him tick, what he needed, what his obstacles were, and just helping coach him as a boss, right? And being that intermediary between him and the rest of the company. I loved that.
Yeah.
Getting his message, understanding what it was, and then disseminating it in a way that I knew people would understand it.
Yeah.
So it was a communications job for me, and it was a coaching job. But all the little details of like his calendar and stuff like that, it was like a lot of that stuff would fall off my radar, to be honest. And I
Yeah.
got in some big trouble.
Yeah, but you were starting to see what you were really good at.
Yes.
You were being
Yes.
pulled towards that.
Exactly. And I did not heed the call right away. I took another
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
And that's when I learned, like, no, actually, executive assistance is not the thing. The thing was all that stuff I did that wasn't in the job description, the emotional transfer and the coaching and the cheerleading,
Yeah.
just clarifying people's message for them and helping them tell their stories. So that's when I realized, wait a second, I do a thing that's not a thing. And so I need to make it a thing. And so I created this thing called a story coach that wasn't a thing until I made it a thing.
Yeah, because you listen, ultimately you listen to what you were naturally good at
Mm-hmm.
and enjoyed as
Mm-hmm.
well, and found something from it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to hear more of your story. So you said kind of long story short there,
Oh
but let's
gosh.
go back in there a little bit. So
Okay.
so how did you get from, so you've got a job, right? And you're like, huh, hee hee, they're paying me to do this thing.
No.
That's so
How
exciting.
did this happen? How did
Right.
this
How did
happen?
this happen? Right. But what happens from there? Where does the tide turn into, like, wait a second, this is my career?
In a funny way, I think it was almost like I didn't have to think about that.
Yeah.
It was obvious. I mean,
Right.
it was just so natural to me. I mean, I remember those talking into the microphone, because I'd spent several years in a call center talking to people all day long, trying to sell ski holidays to people, and I didn't even enjoy skiing myself. Um, I know. Actually, I don't think I've ever admitted that before. But anyway, there we go. An exclusive.
There we go. The story he's not telling. He doesn't even like
There
disclosing
you
it.
go. Oh no, I can't. I mean, it does your knees in. Anyway.
I'm with you. I hate downhill skiing. I come
Oh,
across country though.
good.
Yeah.
We should definitely go into the ski business together, shouldn't we?
Yes. Perfect.
So, I mean, as I say, I was reading the news, but I didn't know how to write scripts or anything like that. So I started to get taught how to do that. I used to get, I mean, you get used to this in journalism. You get big red lines drawn through your script and you're told this is absolute rubbish, try again. This was something that a few years later I was doing to other people, but at the time it was done to me. But I was just naturally curious about people. And I always have been. I've always been, just like you just said, actually, about being fascinated about the way your boss ticked.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to, I think it was probably a press release initially, but I got to know some environmental campaigners who were trying to do a protest to block Heathrow Airport, which is a big airport in Britain, if you've not heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And while one of the things that I certainly learned through my journalism career was that you don't have to agree with someone to want to understand their point of view. So I spent time getting to know them, and they said, look, we're going to do this. We're going to go to the European Parliament in Strasbourg, which is a long way away
Mm-hmm.
in France. And I said, well, do you mind if I come with you? So I spent several days with them, but because I gained their trust and they gained my trust, and they realized that I was giving them an opportunity to speak, but I was asking them tough questions, but I was letting them honestly answer because I wanted to understand them. When all the other press were outside the European Parliament at the sort of press gathering, I was inside the building having lunch with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fascinating to understand how they thought, how they organized as environmental campaigners, how they pitched their message to the press. There was a lot of stuff which I didn't report in order to achieve as much as I did get,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to betray their trust, but I was still able to report far more about the thoughts, feelings, and the things that were going on than any of the other press that were covering. So what actually happened was I realized there was an opportunity for me to offer a piece of audio. So we call them voices. So they're like a sort of 20-second piece that you do. You see it on TV where a reporter will do a quick piece to camera. And it's the same in radio. So I rang up this organization called ITN, who are, as I say, the second biggest organization in the UK at the time. And I said, look, I'm here. I'm in the European Parliament. I'm with these protesters. Do you want a bit of audio? And they said, yeah, we won't pay for it, but you can do it. And I was like, well, of course, because here's an opportunity for me to get my foot in the door with this organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I provided this bit of audio. I was nervous as heck doing it because this was such a massive step up for me.
Yeah.
And then, so then I did some freelancing. I eventually left the original radio station I was at. I did some freelancing. And then I applied for ITN to go in and do a bit of freelancing. And obviously I said straight away, I said, because I've already done some stuff for you.
Right.
Now, admittedly, it
Right.
was only one piece, and so I got the opportunity to go in there. And I think it was about 3 months later that I turned up on a Sunday, and I was meant to be the reporter that day, and the editor had called in sick. There was a couple of other reporters there and me. And the boss who was there that day said, right, you're on the editor's desk. I was like, what? Hang on. Remember, I have done no journalism training at all. I have no legal training.
Yeah.
And these other journalists there have done 3-year courses. And I don't know whether I argued. I don't remember if I argued about this or not, or just went and sat there. But they gave me a trial by fire. Now, when you're working with journalists who know what they're doing, they're not always the most pleasant people. A week later, that editor hadn't come back from being sick. I was still in the chair, and they offered me a job as a duty editor.
Wow.
Now, that was a really stressful week, but somehow I survived it. And I said to them at the time, I said, actually, I came here to be a reporter. And they said, well, look, we want you to be an editor. That's the job we're offering you. If you don't want an editor's job, then you can go back to being a freelancer if you want to. I was like, well, what do? You
Right.
become an editor, don't you?
Of course.
So there I was, literally a couple of years after starting this with no training at all, as one of the duty editors at ITN. And I was like, how did this happen? It was amazing. I mean, I then went on, and again, my creativity and sort of wish to understand people then went on from there. So I did documentaries. One of the ones I was most proud of was to do with prostitution.
Mm.
Now, this was something at the time where I always felt it was treated in two different ways. Either that prostitution was terrible, bad, and awful, or it was some sort of titillating thing. It was almost like, oh, all these girls.
Right.
I say that in a childish way, but that was how it was being treated.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do something that gave people the chance to speak. So I dug into this, and I spoke to sex tourists, so people that literally travel the world to sleep with prostitutes.
Yep.
I went to brothels. I interviewed madams. I spent time with the police vice squad. And what I got from that was a really rounded picture of how it works in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going into this, I'd never been into a brothel in my life, ever. And I remember going into this one and going into the sort of the waiting room.
Yeah.
So the first thing they did when I went in there was they instantly switched off the TV and the VHS player, because you can kind of imagine what might have been playing in there.
Sure.
So they turned that off straight away. and the madam came in, and she sat down next to me on the sofa, and it was really weird because I remember moving away a bit, which I wouldn't have done with anyone else. And that was fascinating. So not just was I getting to interview someone who was first-hand experience of this, and I was about to find out some incredible stories of how she got into it and all this kind of thing, but I was also learning about myself as well, and how I was perceiving people.
Mm-hmm.
And I started interviewing her, and at first she kind of went into, as I think a lot of people do, they go into an autopilot answer. And I started digging into her story more and more, and she started to open up. And I think it was because she saw that, again, I was giving her an opportunity to tell her story. I wasn't trying to change it. I wasn't trying to make it titillating. I wasn't trying to say, oh, you poor girl, I want to rescue you.
Mm-hmm.
I was simply sitting there and saying, you tell me your story, how you see it. And after a few minutes, she started to open up. And I don't know whether I was the first person who'd ever asked her, but it was like this flood of experiences. And not only did I then get to, because she wanted this to get out there, not only did I then get to use this unbelievably powerful audio in my piece, but I also got to experience, give someone an opportunity to talk, but also got to experience it myself, to really get an insight into something which I had no idea about, and to understand it better. And that, I think, in fact, just like going back to your point about the Understand the CEO, to get inside people's minds, and to understand it from their perspective, not you trying to judge them, not you trying to apply your thought processes to them, but to understand a different way of viewing the world, is fascinating and frankly addictive.
Yes.
It is
highly
interesting. People are fascinating. They have, even the most boring person has incredible stories when you start to dig in.
100%.
And when they feel they have permission to talk.
Mm-hmm.
They have incredible stories, every single person out there. And that's, I mean, that's one of my things now in a way, is that one of the things that frustrated me in radio was that you used to have, we had this phrase called rent a quote. So these were people that you would, if you needed to fill some airtime, you would pick up the phone, you knew they'd always be available. Right? You knew you would get a quote. So
Yeah.
you'd end up covering the same stories, the same people over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you knew there were so many other people out there with amazing stories that should be being told. And it's a bit like with podcasting, you know, the opportunity we're getting here to talk. You know, we don't have to have millions of pounds to set up a radio station, and nor do other podcasters. And this is why it so excites me now, podcasting, the fact that so many people can tell their stories and express themselves. So that comes from my journalism past. I want more people to be heard. And anyway, there we go. That's one of my real bugbears. That's one of the things that I want more people to do and tell their stories.
I have so many questions for you. So what,
good.
what was the most challenging part of journalism for you? We've talked a lot about, you know, how the parts of it that just flowed for you and were easy. What were the parts that were a little more challenging for you?
You know, the first thing that came to my head was the hours.
Oh, yeah.
It is, journalism is not a job, it's a lifestyle. So in other words, I remember when the 9/11 attacks happened.
Yeah.
I was on a dentist chair having my teeth done. And the receptionist came in and said, "Oh, you've got to hear what's just happened." And I can't remember. I think I was meant to start about 3:00 in the afternoon that day. We all just went to work. Even people on holiday, even people off sick, we all just went to work.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing. It doesn't matter. You don't start at 9 a.m. and finish at 5. It's the whole time. If someone rings you up with a great story at 10 o'clock at night and you're about to get into bed, you get your clothes on, you go out on it.
Yeah.
And if you're not interested in that, you're not going to make it as a journalist. But because of the nature of the fact you're speaking to such amazing people, it doesn't feel like a job. It's so fascinating to be doing that stuff. But the hours, the sort of the prime shift that you want to do if you're in radio is to be on breakfast. Well, that meant that every morning I got up at 3:10 in the morning. I had a cab that picked me up outside my house at 4:10, drove me an hour to work. And so you get home in the evening, and in theory, you kind of think, well, if you need 8 hours sleep, then I should be going to bed at sort of 7 o'clock at night. But you wanted some evening in the summer. So I used to try and break up my night's sleep. I'd have 4 hours and then try and have another 4 hours. At the time, I was trying to do a bit of martial arts training. And I was at a session one night, and this was when I really realized that it was just getting too much. I was at a training session one night and I collapsed because I was just absolutely physically and emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
So that's the hardest thing about it. It's incredibly exciting, incredibly fun. And I think as podcasters, we can do exactly the same thing, but because we don't have to deliver every single day, we don't have to burn ourselves out to the same extent.
Absolutely.
But we can still interview amazing people and do amazing things and go amazing places.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the hardest part that I never really found a way to cope with.
Yeah. So what would you say is one of your most productive mistakes?
Oh, what a question. Probably cutting off those 10 people that day at the travel agency.
Absolutely.
Because that was not. If you're working in a travel agency right now, I don't recommend you do that if you want to keep your job, because managers, I don't know, they don't see it as a productive thing. Very picky like that. So that one, I'm trying to think if there's any other big mistakes I have made. I honestly can't think of any. I mean, I think you just have to go on a journey. It's really corny, but there's a phrase which I learned probably in the past 10 years, which is that there's no failure, only feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it sounds like, a really sort of woo-woo type phrase, but it is so true.
So true.
Because you can only fail if you give up. Otherwise, it is absolutely impossible to fail.
That's right.
You can only learn. So in all my journalism, in all the things that I've done since, you just keep learning. It's simply a question of time, isn't it? You know, if
Yes.
you've got enough time to learn something and enough time to make enough mistakes, you cannot. I mean, it's impossible to fail.
Yeah. So what are you
Right.
doing now?
Right now, something completely different.
And now for something completely different.
Oh, completely. How very Monty Python.
Yes.
um, when I worked in journalism. But the problem is the money ultimately, even at that level, is still not good enough. So I ultimately left that. I actually set up a YouTube channel about private flying because I had a private pilot's license. So I flew small Cessnas and this thing. And that was a lot of fun. We got 1.6 million views over the course of the year, but economically, it didn't make any money. So it just wasn't sustainable. Then I became a partner in a social media firm. So we did blogging. And then I was at the back of a room and I bumped into a politician who I'd interviewed once on the radio. And he was the leader of the third largest political party in the European Parliament. And he lives about 5 minutes away from me. And we got chatting. This is actually, in a way, this is another mistake almost that went well. We got chatting and he said, would you come and have a look at some of my press releases sometime? And I was like, yeah, fine, whatever. I was quite happy in what I was doing with the social media firm. And I went around his house and it was a sunny afternoon. I sat in his back garden and he gave me this press release. And he said, you know, could you give me some comments on this? And I knew he had a couple of press officers and it was like, well, whatever. And I just shredded this press release. I said, that's rubbish. I would never use this. That's the story down there. As so often with press releases, they're about 2/3 of the way down the story. They're never at the top. I don't understand. Well, I do understand it because they're written often for companies that want it that way. Well, if you want to get press coverage, you don't write it like that.
Yeah.
So I ripped this press release to shreds and I said, this is rubbish. Do it like this, do it like this, do this. And then I said to him, you know, sort of who wrote this? And he said, I did. So I basically, so I had basically just mauled his press release, but I didn't intend it to go anywhere. I didn't think it was going to go anything. And I said, well, look, this is constructive criticism. If you do it like this next time, the press will probably pick it up. And he said, what would it take to get you on board? Like, what? I'm not looking for a job, you know. So I said, well, look, I'm quite happy to help you out with odd things, but I don't need a job. So he's like, okay, well, fine, but could I sort of contact you every so often? So over the next, I think it was about 2 years or so, he used to contact me every so often. I'd give him a bit of advice. And finally, the partnership I was in with the social media firm kind of came to a bit of a natural ending. And he finally said, almost exactly at that point, he said, do you want to come on board again? And I said, yeah, okay. So I did. So for 3 years, I worked doing communications for this guy who was the leader of the third largest group in the European Parliament. So I was in Brussels. I was involved in all the European politics, which, you know, I think even in America, you've heard enough about Brexit. So I was right in the heart of that. And it was absolutely fascinating. And also, actually, from a journalism perspective, from journalism with politics, you're always trying to find out stuff of what's going on with the politicians. So when you work in politics, you hear the reality.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary, but anyway, that's another story. Yeah. So to hear it from the other side, you know, so there were bits where he was about to go on stage and give some big speech. And we were literally in his hotel room, you know, sitting on the bed, practicing the speeches. And I would be grilling him so that he would be ready for journalist questions. I'd be asking him all kinds of awkward questions. So it was absolutely fascinating to be inside that world.
Yeah.
But to then sort of finish off the story is I always feel that this, I don't know, it feels like it's not as interesting, this part of my life and the change, but I've always been a techie. Since I was the age of 15, I have written computer code for fun. And to me, it's not about a sort of geeky, oh, I can make a computer work. To me, it was always a puzzle. So with computer code, it's a bit like doing Sudoku. But at the end of it, when you've used your brain power, instead of ending up with a piece of paper which has got numbers and letters all over it, or whatever, I've never done Sudoku, but I know the concept. With computer code, you write something that then does something, a tool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I wrote, when I was in politics, I wrote this whole sort of political campaign planner that we used in a campaign. When I was in journalism, I had sort of my contacts and who I was talking to and what leads I needed to follow up, which I'd written all myself. And I wrote all these different programs. So when Brexit happened, I started to think, right, it's time to express the techie side of me. So I actually joined a company called Automatic, who own WordPress.com. And they're basically one of the founder is one of the people who created WordPress. And I work in the sort of, well, basically it's a support role, but I do a lot to do with podcasting in there, but I sort of haven't talked much about that because it's not the sort of public side of me at the moment, but that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm working for the firm that do WordPress websites, and I'm in that sort of support role and helping people out, helping them get websites up and running. It's a very different thing, but it's allowing me to express that sort of techie side of me, which is something I'd never expressed in my life, and I wanted to give a try at. And the fact I've got involved in the podcasting side of things, so not so much from the broadcasting, but from the technical side of setting stuff up, has been a really interesting way of me kind of playing with those two sides.
Yeah.
So that's where I am now.
Pulling different parts of yourself together.
Yeah. It's the techie and the creative side.
Yeah. So it's really wonderful when you can integrate that, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's nice because, I mean, it goes back to that point I was saying about I felt more people needed to be heard.
Yeah.
When you get someone coming through and saying, I want to set up a podcast, and obviously I don't tell them that I'm doing stuff like this. I'm just another face to them. And I can help them get that set up. That feels good.
Yeah.
You know, I can't then go to them and give them a critique about their podcast, and I can't sort of look at their script and draw a red line through it and say, I used to be a news editor, you know, you do this. I'm not doing any of that. But the fact that I can give them a bit of extra encouragement and say, you know, it sounds really exciting what you're doing. You know, if you put this here, or if you upload this bit of audio there, blah, 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 blah. The fact that I can help to get someone else underway, that feels good. That really feels good to get someone else expressing their story. You know, I love that. I just love it.
Absolutely.
Encouraging them to try.
Yeah. So we're going to look ahead now. I'm going to jump to the future. Okay. So I want you to close your eyes for a moment.
This is so, I know you ask other people this, and this is the bit I knew was going to be the hardest.
Just relax. Just relax.
Okay.
It's
I'm relaxing.
Scary. Not scary.
Okay. You can probably hear the deep breathing coming from there.
Deep breath. Okay. So now I have waved my magic wand, and now all of your dreams have come true. Everything that you have always wanted, all your deepest desires have now come to pass. So I just want you to look around. Where are you? What's going on? What do you do in this wonderful, ideal, perfect reality? Just describe it for us. What do you see?
Gosh. I thought about this, and it sort of feels very fuzzy. But it's like when I have an Australian partner. I live in the UK, and we're planning to move to Australia if the Australian visa office let us in and COVID goes away. And living in Britain, I'm used to it pouring with rain all the time. And I would love to dream. So it's, the whole idea is that it can be anything, isn't it? Anything that you would like. Absolutely. If you just let yourself go.
Yes, anything. So just be there. It's not get out of your intellectual side here. Okay. Get into your heart. You're just looking around and seeing what is. What do you see there? What do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your skin?
Yes, I do. I can see white sandy beaches. I can see crystal clear water.
There we go.
I can feel myself walking down the beach and my feet going into the water and it being warm water.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of islands nearby. So it's probably in a collection of islands. I mean, this is where, again, it's a bit about getting out the way of yourself and just letting yourself float.
Just let yourself dream. So what do you smell? Do you smell the salt spray? Do you smell flowers?
It's not that salty. There's just this warmth in the air, this comfort. You can feel it on your skin all around you. It's that just sort of contenting warmth. It's like, you feel your feet going to that water, and that warm, it's not overly hot. It's just nice. And you can feel the warm breeze on you. So it's not stifling. It's not sort of muggy. It's just a warm breeze. And it just, I can almost imagine that I've got a house on there. This is what it
Yeah.
feels like.
Okay.
It's
Walk up
unreality.
to your house. Walk up to your
Yeah.
house. Here it is. What does it
So
look like?
it's on the edge. It looks out onto the same view.
Yep.
So it's probably got a big window.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my office, because I've worked from home for 10 years. I've probably got an office that looks out onto this view. So I can
Yes.
imagine looking up from my computer screen and
Mm-hmm.
looking out. Instead of in Britain where I'm looking out onto a suburban street with pouring with rain, I'm looking out onto this beautiful scene, and I can feel myself just sort of, this feels good. This
Does
feels good.
anyone else live here with you?
Yes, my partner.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Beautiful. What else? What brings you meaning in this space? What do you do that brings you meaning?
And it's funny, from all the stuff we're just talking about, again, it's a bit like you saying that you felt you could never make money out of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a way of me to help people express themselves through maybe my experiences, or this whole thing again about getting people to either podcast or somehow, but just to
Yep.
kind of push them over the edge so that they will
Yeah.
start to tell these interesting stories, and not just, I know you do this too. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, as I say, even the most boring person has got amazing stories inside them if you can bring it out of them or encourage them to try. And I would, if I could make money, that's it, I suppose. If I could actually make money doing that, helping people and encouraging people to come out of their skin and make enough money compared to kind of what I'm doing now, which pays quite well, that would be amazing. That would
Yeah.
be absolutely amazing. But you see all these kind of speakers doing these sorts of things, and it's,
Mm-hmm.
I can't see myself doing that, but probably in exactly the same way as I can't see I didn't have what it took to be a journalist. So,
Right.
who knows? Who knows?
So I
But
want you to just
okay.
allow yourself for a moment to see yourself doing that. That's what you do. You coach people, you help people, bring people out of their shells. You teach them what you know about how to speak publicly, right? How to share their stories in a way that really resonates with an audience. You have those skills.
Mm-hmm.
So just put yourself in that moment of this is what you do. And I want you to see yourself actually working with a client and they're
You know
struggling
what?
with
I
something.
don't think it would be a single client.
Okay, so what is it?
When you were saying that, there, an image was appearing
Yes, yes.
as you were saying it. It is. I am on a stage. Well, no, I'm not on a stage, actually. It started off as a stage. I started off on the stage,
Uh-huh.
and I started a presentation, and I just walked straight down into the audience and started interacting with people.
Yeah.
And I probably have I've probably got a microphone in my hand,
Yep.
and I'm going up to the person I think is the least likely to talk or want to talk, and I'm sticking the microphone in front of them, and I'm getting them to talk, and everyone in that audience is going, "Wow, that was an amazing story."
Beautiful.
I mean, imagine if you could do, I don't know.
Of
I don't
course
know
you
whether
can
you
do
could
that. No,
yeah, I know, but I don't know whether you could honestly I don't know whether you could make enough money from it to survive, but what an amazing feeling that would be
but
to be able
that
to
is
get
the
someone out of their
limiting,
shell.
that's the limiting belief right there that you
Yeah,
just
you're
have to get
right.
rid of. Just get rid of it. So I want you to,
Right.
you're in this moment, you're doing this, you're walking around, you're
Mm.
talking to people, you put microphones in their faces. What was
Okay.
the step just before this? How did you set this up? How did you set up this thing that you're doing? It's a workshop or a presentation. What did you
I
do?
probably, it's funny this, isn't it? How things pop into your head when you start doing this.
Uh-huh.
I don't know whether it would lead on directly, but I remember going to a meetup event in London, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a fairly small event, but there was a few people there speaking about things they knew about. It was a bit kind of a mix of stuff. And I didn't speak. I just went along and just watched. But I could have done. I could have joined in. I could have spoken. And I could imagine getting up an event like that and speaking and talking about journalism. As I say, until today, I haven't, apart from friends, I have never said all this stuff that I've just said to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't know. I mean, people listening to this now, I don't know whether whether they go, oh my gosh, I wish he'd shut up, or whether they feel any inspiration from what I've said. But if something that I've said inspires, and I could do that same again and be at that event and talk and inspire someone there, and someone in the audience is kind of like, you know what, I'd love you to do that at another event. Could you come to our event and do it?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, yeah, I suppose so. Why not? And I turn up and I do it, and I go, wow, this is amazing. And someone says, would you like to come along to my event? And it's like, and I could see that could lead somewhere. And the funny thing about that is, I think even if the money wasn't as good, or even if it wasn't even there, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I'd be able to resist.
Right.
It would be too much fun to be able to get people to just, and again, not just standing at the front and talking about myself, but to get out there and to actually, while I'm there, get people talking.
Yeah.
I don't
Because
know.
here's the thing, Richard,
Yeah.
your gifts are yours alone.
Yeah.
Nobody else has them.
Yeah.
So if you're not giving your gifts, the world doesn't have them. Do you
Yes.
see?
Good point. Yeah. Yes.
So I don't mean to lecture you. I know what
No.
you're doing is fulfilling in its own way right now. I just want you to really stop limiting yourself with that belief that you can't make money doing what your gift really is. And you know it is.
You know, this is such dangerous stuff, because
I know.
I'm the kind of person that so much in the past, when I got out of my way, I went and did stuff, and it's like,
Uh-huh.
there's a real danger. I might start trying to look into this.
Oh, for those who are watching the video, I'm doing my evil fingers right now.
Yeah, but I love the way you do this. And like I say, I've heard your other podcasts, and I'm hearing your other guests when they start sort of thinking about it. And I was wondering how I was going to react when you did this to me. And it is fascinating. You just start to go into this kind of visualization, and things pop up in your head.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
start seeing things, and it's
Yeah. So
quite interesting.
I want you to hold on to that vision.
Okay.
I want you to solidify for yourself. There's this vision of you on the beach, but there's also this
Mm-hmm.
vision of you in your office looking out at the beach. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a vision of you with the microphone, talking to
Mm-hmm.
people, getting shy people to come out of their shell. So I want you to kind of have a little mental slideshow where you have these little images, okay? If there's a piece of music that goes along with that for you, I find that super helpful. Even if it's just a short piece, or if it's just a type of music, for me, that's kind of the secret sauce. And every morning for 15 seconds, I play music and I show this little slideshow to myself. And it just sets the tone for
Good
my day.
idea. I'm trying to think what music I would listen to.
Well, think about it. I'm sure it'll come to you.
Gosh, that's a really interesting question. No, you've really stumped me on that one, because it's like, you know, you naturally sort of think to yourself, well, should it be some kind of motivational sounding music? But then at the same time, that feels cheesy.
Right.
And it's something that connects with you, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, it's almost, part of me wonders if a sound effect
Mm-hmm.
would work, like the
Sure.
sound of the sea.
Yeah. Waves. That's a big one. Mm-hmm. Or just people talking, you know?
Yeah.
Just that sound of, you know, when you're about to go on stage, you're about to
Mm-hmm.
present, and you hear people just chit-chatting in the audience. That's a big one for me.
Yes.
Yeah. But sounds,
Yeah, that's
smells,
interesting.
these things, you know, we think about visuals a lot, but we don't necessarily think about the audio portion and, you know, the smell and taste portion of things.
Mm.
So the more you can layer in more senses, the more real it becomes. And the more you can really see yourself in that and go, oh, this seems possible. Why wouldn't this be possible? And you start
Really
to
interesting.
see paths toward it. Doors start to just open up.
I think the sound effects actually is more me. The more
Yeah.
I think about it.
All right.
Because if you shut your eyes and hear the sound, you're kind of taken there, aren't you?
Yeah.
I will give that a try.
Excellent.
Gosh knows what's going to happen now if I try, though.
I can't wait to find out what's going to happen. And folks at home, if you found this inspiring, please let Richard know. So, Richard, where can they find you?
Well, at the moment, I mean, I don't have a business doing this or anything like that. I'm not a coach. I'm not anything like that. I'm quite happily working for the firm that I work for at the moment. But I mean, a little bit about me, my sort of bio. so to speak, is just literally richardmidson.com. That's Richard,
There you go.
MIDSON.com. And that's literally it. So there's a bit of, I mean, you've heard it all today on this show, but there's a little bit about me there. But if you want to get in contact, or then please do. Love to hear from you.
Or just leave a comment, let us
Yeah,
know.
please do.
Thank you so much.
No worries at all.
This was
Thank
really
you so
special
much.
to me. I feel like you opened up in a really beautiful way and really pushed yourself a little bit, which is wonderful.
It's been really interesting. It's I thought about, well, what should I say, or what parts of my story should I say? And it's interesting to hear the kind of things that probably resonate most with me as well. When you've asked me those questions, like, what is it that I felt I wanted to say?
Yeah.
No, it's been really interesting. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.